Hey, Tracy Ariel from Notable Nonfiction here. I'm here to talk about why you might want to profile your ancestors. And I have three main advantages that genealogists can gain from writing narrative stories about the people that they're researching. The first one is that it helps you ask better questions, and the second one is it frames research um, in time. You can actually get a real sense of the eras that you're researching if you actually put them into stories. And the third one is it helps you communicate well to friends and family. My family is a lot more likely to read a story about one of my ancestors than they are to hear as I go on and on and on about the wonderful thing that I discovered at the archives. So, in order to demonstrate what I mean by this, I thought that I would take you through three of my own stories and how each of them changed because I wrote the story. Uh, Basically, I want you to investigate how this might work for you as well. So, the first one is a story about my ancestor, Louise Therese Larreau. She was a woman who lived in Quebec in the 1700s. And when I first decided to write about her, I noticed that she died in October, and it just so happened that I was writing the story initially in the fall in Quebec. And all around me, the leaves were changing. And I couldn't help think how tragic it was that she died just as the beauty of Quebec was really um, so extravagant. And she died 2 weeks after her 10th child was born. Um, so it would have been such a captivating time because she had her daughter, um, and then she died. Uh, so I wrote a fiction story because I didn't have any other information except the year of her death and the year of her birth. And I knew that there was a fascinating war on when she was born. And then I just used the colors as a way to make a fiction story. Then later on, as I was captivated by her, I found out when each of her children were born and when they died. And so I was able to turn what had originally been a fiction story into a nonfiction story. And that's the story that I'm going to show you here. And again, I still kept the sense of the leaves turning when she died and her being surrounded by so much beauty and yet dying in the midst of that. And she was only 38. It was just an extraordinary connection to think about her in those terms. Um, and that leads to another story that I was writing that led to the second benefit that I really think happens when you write narrative about your ancestors. And that's a story that I called Moonlight Serenade. And this story began actually when I was a small child, because my grandmother used to tell me about dancing as a teenager. And as I was doing stories, as I was looking into the research about her and her first husband, I realized that they got married the year after Glenn Miller's Moonlight Serenade was top of the charts. Just knowing that fact made me realize it made those stories about dancing to dancing to the songs when she was a teenager come alive, because she got married just before her 21st birthday, and so it would have been right around that time when Glenn Miller's Moonlight Serenade was up, and the essence of that song and her relationship with her first husband, which it seems like they had so little time together because he only had 9 days before their wedding, 2 days after their wedding, to be with it, and that was the last time she ever saw him. She had my mom a year later, and he died very shortly after that in the war in Italy, and so writing up this story really put that their suffering and their love in such a poignant essence, and really gave me a sense of how intense the war was. Um, and then, of course, the resulting story is so much more captivating to read than these list of dates and names connected to the two of their lives. And that leads to the third reason why I think it's very helpful for you to write narrative about your ancestors and profile them the way a journalist would. And that's a story that I wrote. It's because communicating well. You communicate so much more precise, in a more precise fashion, and you connect a lot more facts together in something that reads very easily. To show you this, I'd like to emphasize my story that I ended up calling The Scoundrel's Wife. And this was the story of my ancestor Marie-Louise Allard, who got married in 1661 to a man that she thought she'd be with forever. And yet he left. He left Canada in the autumn of 1773 after they had 10 children together, and their youngest child was only 3 months old. And he didn't just leave and then bought a house somewhere in upper New York State, but he left her with all these debts and lawsuits from people that he had swindled because he got them drunk, and then he would gamble with them. He would get them to give away all their property. And there were 17 of these lawsuits that were handled after he left. And so they took everything that the family had to pay off these debts. So she ended up having to move into the poorhouse with all of her children. And thinking about this dilemma as a story made her come alive so much more to me than otherwise would have been the case. And it was just a great example about how profiling your ancestors can make their stories come alive for everyone. Thanks.